Good afternoon, traders. This is Christian from Hertz Traffic Trade Group, and this is your end of day market recap for Wednesday, April 9th. Another quiet day on our hands. Nothing really moving today. I'm joking, of course. I mean, incredible volatility on a day-to-day basis. This time, huge move to the upside, off of some major, you could call it oversold. Fear finally got into this market. And we've been in a headline driven market, but ultimately things finally got to the point where really oversold and washed out. I think as well what got the market on edge and enough for somebody to blink or change was what happened in the bond market. Last night, a lot of commotion in the bond market. I try to address that as much as possible in the last couple of videos for this week. Just like, hey, the bond market doesn't usually act this way. Pretty decent volatility, and things really I think hit a fever pitch last night where people were watching what the 10-year yield was doing, and ultimately something looked like it was going to break in the system. There was a lot of talk about what that could be. Basis swaps, who knows? But ultimately, once you have that type of volatility, it shakes things up enough where you get to a point where something has to give, something has to change. And I think that we got the something has to change. So anyway, that's my take. I think if you go down the list of things that we've seen, uh you know like even today, when I wrote my midday note, I was talking, and this was right around 12:50 today, probably about 20 minutes before that announcement on tariffs, but was just talking about how there was no S&P new highs today, 4-week new highs. So things have gotten pretty washed out. And I have this note up from earlier. Let me just show this to you. All right, so here's my note from earlier. The S&P 4-week new highs were 0, and the new lows were 42%. And I think if you go back and what I reviewed earlier in this week, and don't worry, I'm going to go over some charts here in just a second. I just want to rehash a little bit because I think that you can kind of learn from some of this, where some things get super washed out. Like, so for example, and this is how it looked at the end of the day, but you could look. I mean, this got to a very extreme level. This is something that I had kind of mentioned earlier in the week, that this was washed out. 4-week new lows were just there was over 80% of the S&P 500 made a 4-week low just the other day. Also, if you go back to Monday, now again, this doesn't mean this was easy just because we saw these extreme readings, like many of which happened on Monday. This is Wednesday. Yesterday was a very difficult day, and you know, it doesn't, I wish that it would be as simple as like you get all those readings and like the very next day, like it happens right away, where you get where you get things to really change. I mean, we did get a gap up yesterday. Unfortunately, that was sold, and that could have, we know that there's CTAs that are selling in this market, and that could have been partly responsible for that. But just one other point about Monday's price action. I think it was Monday where we saw, or sorry, I'm forgetting, mixing up my days. It was either Monday or Friday where we had only 3%. At one point, it was 3% up volume and 97% down volume, right? These are washout numbers. These are things what are known as, capitulation. I didn't think that going back to Friday, and I'm pretty sure that's when we got that reading. Markets don't usually bottom on a Friday, so I thought Monday was a good chance of that. And we did get a major bounce on Monday. Tuesday then we had the gap up. So all of these things, even though it didn't give you like boom, gap up and then we ran further. Just I think once you start checking all these boxes, the probability, seemed to be that the risk is got so much priced into the downside. Plus, you add in what was going on to the fixed income market. things started to kind of tilt themselves into reward to risk. So in any event, that's what I try to do. My approach this week is I went over in yesterday's video, I talked about all the trades that I took and took off some trades. I went kind of back at it today and said, just try to observe objectively what was going on in the market. And, here is my note this afternoon, and a couple of things that I had said in here. When I look at, I put on a trade in Walmart. I thought that Walmart was pretty nice in terms of what they said. And so I added along, based on that. Now, this wasn't the biggest thing that rallied today after 1 o'clock, but it certainly did well. Right. And here's Walmart. And again, I don't mind being in something like this. This did close back above the value area for the month, and I'm going to hang on to that. Of course, I really, what I noticed yesterday was how well the semiconductors were performing. I think, and you go back to Monday where they had a really nice move, and I had mentioned, I was like, we hadn't seen the semiconductors show signs of life like that, and basically in a couple months. So I looked at Nvidia again. I had my alert set. I got stopped out in a trade yesterday, which was right here. Again, this is the part about like technical trading, why it's easy and also hard, right? Because you get a signal, you go long, and unfortunately, if it doesn't work, right, the price came right out of the value area yesterday, and you have to click the sell button, and that's not easy to do considering how dicey this market has been. But I sold yesterday right in here, and I said, hey, I'm going to try this again. It's trying again to kind of turn the corner. It showed nice strength, and it got above I had an alert right at 100, or excuse me, 101 today. And this worked, and this was the trade setup that I gave right before 1 o'clock today. So I hope this worked for you. I hope that you are signed up for Substack, where I try to really give some of these objective observations. If you're not, even if you want, there is a free version to this too, but it's only $20 a month. It's ttgtrading.substack.com. And this is how I traded Nvidia. So once it made that move, bring up the 1 hour chart so that you can kind of see how this unfolded. All right, so this is what I was referring to. In the beginning of this candle, like, right around, I think, right around 1 o'clock. I mean, you'll see my trading blotter. Right at 1258. And again, like, I didn't take a huge trade because you can't trade huge. So, if you've been trading huge size, you've gotten schnockered. How do you like that word? Over the last couple of weeks. So I put on a starter position. And, the thing is, you don't need a big position with the way that this market has been moving, both to obviously to the upside today, but to the downside as well. So I got involved. Thank goodness I followed my signals, got long Nvidia. I didn't know what was going on, so I took a target, right at a dollar, and then you can kind of see how I traded today. But I did take a target, another one at the top of the value area, and now I'm kind of just sitting with the rest here, and we'll honor this. My trailing stop will be right around just inside the value area. But again, this is trying to just trade objectively, unemotionally, and following trading signals. It sounds easy, right? But I know there's a lot of time you have to click the mouse too, right? I mean, that's the hardest part, is when you get excited, you get a signal, and it begins to work like it did yesterday, and then all of a sudden it does a U-turn. It's disappointing. And and that's what happened to me yesterday. Right, here's my trade blotter from yesterday, just so that you could see, here's my entry. Again, I took a quick target. I was also long some Amazon, and then I got out of Nvidia here at 100. This was at 12. That was the last trade I did yesterday, by the way. That was at 12:36. So again, you know, you have to be okay with that sometimes, and that has added up. In terms of, that's a paper cut loss. Again, it helped that I took one target in this yesterday, but you know, it's been a very difficult tape, and you've had to kind of stay with it a little bit, and realize that the reason why I took a couple trades even yesterday where it started to work and then didn't work is because going back to what I said a few minutes ago is that the return started to add up. The possibility of a high return versus risk started to really kind of add up. So I stayed with it, and even, my plan was kind of coming into today that I was going to mostly trade the indices. Because that's where, I've talked about when the VIX goes up, correlation increases, and you don't need to be too specific with names. But I kind of just said, hey, I'm getting some things that are starting to materialize in single names. So, it's important to pay attention to both. You didn't necessarily, and I traded the Qs in the morning, before all of this too, but that was really what I traded in the afternoon too. Now we can kind of go through and look at some charts. So for me, I'm going to stay long, again, I don't have that big of a position on an NVIDIA, but I'm going to stay long versus this bottom of value area. And that's what I'm basically watching because you're going to have a lot of overhead supply. I will probably, if possible, look for this to kind of get up to around this top of value as well as this. I think that's the 50-day moving average. That's what I would be looking for in a video. So again, I'm still not looking for, things to get back to their all-time highs because we got a lot of overhead supply and things could go like this. It could go up and then kind of come back down and check down and settle in here and do a whole bunch of different things. So that's the way that I'm looking at it. I think it's very interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Qs first because that's more or less what I've been trading. But um, notice a couple things here in the daily chart. Number one, we did hold the bottom of the value area. And again, if you go to my note this morning, not this morning, but sorry, it's a midday note. So what did I say? I said price trying to hold inside the yearly value area. Watch 416.60. So again, like I'm giving you an example of like how I basically analyze this. And again, I try to be as objective as possible. Price trying to hold on to its yearly value area. Watch 416 support and overhead 5-day moving average. 1 hour chart. Price got rejected at the value area for the week. This should read yesterday. No, price did not take out this week's lows. So for now, price is putting in a higher low. And that's all that's all the information that we really had. Let me go to the 1 hour chart and I'll reference what I'm referring to here. Well, actually, let me go back to here. What I was referring to is basically this, right? This is what happened yesterday. And I said I put an arrow in here too to see if price can actually turn the corner. But here was your lower high versus earlier in the week. That sometimes gives a little bit of a hint that as small as a positive that we did not take out those lows. And here was also, take note of how that unfolded. We just broke, right at that 1 o'clock time frame, we just broke above these moving averages. And then we really kind of took off and we broke into the value area and we moved pretty decently. So I'm not holding anymore. I use TQQQ, even though I chart Qs because I think that that's more important. If you look at the 5-minute candle as well, notice we in 15 minutes, we moved right up to this VPOC, right? And we kind of just hung around here a little bit. We kind of moved down. We held this moving average. I stayed in my trade, because I went long. I went long at 127, the TQQQ. And then it actually pulled back on me a little bit, right? So it was 127. So that was right in here, right when we took out this VPOC, we kind of came in here and that's where I added to my position as long as once I saw that we were holding both that 5-period moving average and this line, which is the value area for the week. So we kind of back checked that a little bit. So I added here, which is kind of aggressive to do that, but that's fine. We moved up here and you can kind of see, I took targets as well as what I was doing in NVIDIA. And then I got out of it at 245. So why did I do that? Well, this is right here. Once we lost this 5-period moving average, I said, oh, something's changing here. The trend is we might be losing the trend. I don't know how far we're going to go down to. So I exited here and then I waited literally about 15 minutes later and we came into this moving average and I like this candle. So this was right at 3 o'clock and boom, I went, I went right back in and basically held to almost the end of the day with TQQQ. Um, Yeah, and I took some targets and some other things too. But yeah, so this is going to be interesting. I keep saying that word. I apologize. I realize I must be saying the word interesting over and over and over. But now, so if you're not long queues or if you are and you're wondering what to do, we're either going to get rejected here. So this is gray box is the value area for the year, which is we've major support, major reversal off the VPOC as well. Again, you had to be patient with this. Yesterday was a really tough day in terms of if you went longs at some point yesterday. And but we held where we needed to, the bottom of the value area after taking out the VPOC. Now we've pushed right into all the way into the bottom of the April value area. So resistance. So this is going to be the level to watch for tomorrow. 467.88. That's going to be the next big hurdle for us to get above. And we've got a lot of things to watch for tomorrow. So we have the CPI report, which they're expecting only 0.1%. So they're actually looking for inflation to come down. Who knows if that's actually going to happen? Ex-food and energy, they're looking for 0.3. So that'll be tomorrow at 8:30. Plus, we're going to get a lot of earnings, earnings reports are going to start. But that's the level that I'm watching for tomorrow. SPY is going to look a little bit different here. I mean, just a monster move. Look at this. We're almost right back into that bottom of the value area for the month, right? So it's amazing. I get this all the time where people are like, you know, technicals don't work when you're in a headline driven market, or, technicals don't work in high volatility. Maybe your system doesn't, but I'll tell you, this worked exceptionally well and gave me signals to get in and where I wanted to take profits. And, here was NVIDIA, but, we're rising right up to resistance. I mean, it's when you've got the right tools, you can make some good decisions, right? Here was the NVIDIA trade. Just going back, I already went over the entry, but yeah, I mean, this is okay with me, to get out of a good portion of the trade, right where I thought that there was resistance. That's fine. It's a nice profitable trade. Now I've got the last portion of the trade on just to see if it wants to rally further. But it absolutely technicals work. And as long as you've got a defined system, it's going to give you a lot of clear, um, clear places to try a trade and to know where the trade's not going to work. I mentioned I would go through some more names with you. Here's, and I approached this week, as I mentioned yesterday, and I try to really be simplistic. Didn't have a lot of names on the watch list. I thought so we'll start with Celsius. This name has held up really well. It still has work to do. So it's nice that it's at the top of the range. And this is just a 1-hour chart. Why am I using a 1-hour chart? So that you could kind of break down the price action here. Notice that we're right at the top of the value area. And we took out we're above the value area for the week, and we took out this VPOC up here. So I would watch what happens at this 38 level. A few other names. I did not stick with Amazon, unfortunately. I got out of that, but look at Amazon rally right into resistance as well. Really interesting how we just basically rallied. So many things rallied into resistance. Watch this 29 or 190, 193 level. I would not try a trade there personally. Other things that look more appealing to me, Palantir, right into the 50-day moving average. Watch to see if it could hold 88.56. That's your significant level, as well as the 50-day moving average, which is where it stopped. I also like this DOX trade. Right, nice little turn there. Your resistance is about 7% higher, right, all the way into the bottom of the value area. So there you go. I'm not going to go over too much more. I thought also what was very notable was, we went over this in the trading room yesterday, we started to see a lot of leap call buying. We saw that in ServiceNow. We saw that in NVIDIA. We saw that in applied materials, right? And there's a couple other, we saw this in XLK as well too, right? It was a very, we just haven't seen that type of option activity where people were actually taking shots in some things. And I checked today to make sure that this increased open interest, but this was a $1.7 million trade. Now they didn't go out too far with this. They went out to June, but the implied volatility is only 25 here, right? They went out, here was the trade yesterday, and I'll show you applied materials because it's easy to find. NVIDIA, there's so much option flow. But here was the trade in applied materials. Notice they went out to January 27. This was an $11 million trade yesterday. Why do you think that they went out to January 27? Probably a couple of reasons. One, to give themselves time. Number two, the options aren't, the front month is jacked in terms of volatility and implied volatility. So by going out a little bit further, they avoided the most expensive options, which I thought was very interesting. Same thing, JP Morgan, there was January 27 trades, 2027 trades. This is going to be another one I think that's going to be interesting to watch. This, I would watch the 200-day moving average, which lines up very closely with the bottom of value, 230.54. Guys, I'm going to leave it there. Have a great night. There will not be any video tomorrow. As well as Friday, I will be traveling. I will try to do them next week, but I'll be traveling next week. So I'll be in front of the screens, but I won't be able to do everything, in terms of, long end of day videos. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow.